The Mecklenburg County ABC Law Enforcement Division provides a free training program to ABC permitted establishments called the Alcohol Seller and Server Excellence Training to educate employees on the possession and sale of alcohol. This ABC officer training covers underage sales, forms of acceptable identification, and employee age requirements. The Mecklenburg County ABC Board, more than a bottle.
Hello, everybody. I am Beth Troutman, your co-host for Good Morning BT on WBT AM, and welcome to Radio 1 Charlotte's Community Mental Health Series in partnership with the Mecklenburg County Alcoholic Beverage and Control Board. Now, this will be a space where you will find hope, you'll find resources and assistance, and each month we discuss topics for you, our listeners, that can affect your overall mental and behavioral health. Now, for the series, we are going to address today anxiety. Now, anxiety affects a lot of people in many different ways. And here to help us with answers on how to cope with anxiety, we have two local organizations who will provide us with the toolboxes needed for ourselves, for our loved ones, and for our friends. Now, joining me today is Dr. Kareem Puranda, founder of Achieving Success on Purpose, and Justin Perry, MSW of Perry Counseling and Healing, who works in collaboration with Theater Gap, an initiative. So stay tuned and get ready as I try to make certain that I get the answers that are most frequently asked questions on anxiety. Now, to get started, I'd first like to welcome Dr. Puranda with Achieving Success on Purpose. Dr. Puranda, hi, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's good to be here.
Now, I know that there are so many questions surrounding anxiety. Now, when we're talking about community and behavioral health, let's start off by talking about you, some of the information on your organization and how you achieve success on purpose, which is your organization.
I love how you did that. Beautiful. We have a saying around here, right? We call it I am ASAP, which stands for I am Achieving Success on Purpose. And the premise of the name of our organization is based upon the ideology that it's not about how you start, it's how you finish. And so growing up in Bronx, New York, I didn't grow up in a delicate neighborhood. It was very rough. And we grew up in poverty and I survived it. My main anchor or my main opportunity to get out of that environment was football. Everybody doesn't have athletic prowess. Everybody doesn't have the resources. So some people end up staying in that cycle. Well, football rescued me. I ended up receiving a partial scholarship to play football at what I like to call the Harvard of the South, Livingstone College. And it brought me way down here from New York, and I ended up staying here. I went on, I graduated, I became a police officer for several years, and then I transitioned into the clinical mental health realm. And I developed ASAP from the context of being a prevention, intervention, and diversion program. Most of the kids that we work with come from disadvantaged backgrounds, very similar to a background that I grew up in. And many of these kids that we work with are misunderstood for the most part. And many of them are operating according to the pain created by their trauma. And many people don't know how to read through those behaviors, but we do. We're a trauma-informed program where we offer free therapy to kids ages 12 to 17 who've been impacted by underserved communities or being marginalized in some way, shape, or form. And what we're working on nowadays is to try to figure out how to get them before they get involved in the system. And so we're doing a lot of different initiatives and programming to make sure that we approach them from a preventative standpoint versus a diversion standpoint.
That is absolutely remarkable. And when you are offering services to these young people, what are some of the signs, some of the symptoms that you're looking for, especially when it comes to anxiety, that might let you know that they are dealing with some form of trauma, that might let you know where they might be headed without your help?
Yeah, great question. So what we tend to look at, right, when I talk about reading through the behaviors, we have to just look at the outcomes. I like to use a lot of metaphors in my therapeutic approach with my clients. So it's sort of kind of like baking a cake. If you bake a cake without all the adequate ingredients, then you're going to get an outcome that's not so desirable. And when we start looking at people's outcomes, when they're ending up in trouble, when they're getting suspended, when they're ending up in prison, when they're ending up in predicaments that complicate or compromise their safety, those outcomes are a byproduct of incorrect ingredients, whether they're hanging out with the wrong people, hanging out in the wrong places, doing the wrong things, or if they have a corrupt belief system that was created by the trauma or poverty of their childhood. And so these are the things we address from a self-awareness standpoint, where in our program, we also incorporate chess to slow down their thinking so that they can take a look at how their impulsivity, which is a byproduct of survival mode from the trauma they witnessed, how their impulsivity creates now a trajectory that gets them things that they don't want. So we look at the outcomes. If you're ending up in predicaments that you don't like, then you didn't plan for it, then that means your ingredients are wrong and we have to reassess those ingredients.
Well, I'm an avid baker, and I like the way that you say that, because if you don't have the right ingredients, you don't have the right outcome. And that's a great way to recognize what might be going on with people. If young people are experiencing trauma, experiencing anxiety, can they be having these negative experiences without even knowing about it?
Oh my goodness, you better believe it, because a lot of times when you live in an environment that's impacted by trauma or induced by trauma, you tend to normalize it, and then you don't even know to call it a problem. You'll think everybody else is the problem, and it's really a byproduct of the environment you grew up in that's abnormal. So we tend to normalize pain, and that's not necessarily a good thing, because the more you practice the normalization, the more it becomes hardwired as a habit, and then it's harder to break the cycle created by that potentially generational poverty or generational generational curse. Now, I'm a believer that the generational curses people speak about are merely generational behavioral patterns that have never been broken. And it usually it's got to start somewhere. And I'm so thankful that we're able to create a program like this and get funding to do it, because many people don't know that they need the help. They don't know what they don't know until they come into our program. Then they realize, wow, wait a minute. The trauma that I've lived through is not normal, but it's normal in my neighborhood. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's normal. And so we try to correct those narratives.
That is such an excellent point, because if you've seen it all the time, or if it's been part of your life the whole time, then you think that it's normal, but it's not necessarily something that's good for your soul, that might be good for your mental health. It makes me wonder if young people are experiencing things like panic attacks or anxiety attacks, are there differences between those two things as it relates to what they have learned, what they've been through, and how their body is responding?
Absolutely. So I like to look at it package it from the lens of the 5 psychological domains. You got social, emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. Anxiety exists in all of these realms, but just in different ways. And so when you think about this combination, you're also looking at a variety or diversity of experiences that can play into impacting anxiety in all of these realms. And so when you talking about an anxiety attack, it's more gradual. It's a buildup. It means that, hey, there's something that triggered me, and now it makes me anxious. Now I'm in survival mode. So one of my options is to either fight, flight, freeze, or play fawn in order to escape this threat in whatever way this threat is presenting itself. And so it's more gradual, right? And then I start normalizing, and the gradual piece can last quite some time, days, weeks, months, maybe even years. Panic attack, though, quite different. It's more abrupt, it's more impulsive, it's more accelerated, and it's in the moment. It's immediate. Panic attacks are traditionally aligned with immediate imaginative threats, such as claustrophobia, sort of kind of like being stuck in an elevator and assuming that you won't be able to get out. You're trapped, and then it'll just come out of nowhere. You'll start to panic to the point of passing out, because the heart palpitations and all these things, it's real to the person, but it may not be real to everybody else that's in the environment.
If someone is experiencing any kind of anxiety, they may think that they're just experiencing normal stress, but maybe it is far more serious. It is far more prone to anxiety, maybe anxiety attacks. How can someone know when they should seek attention or ask for help?
Yeah. Normal stress, it's a subjective term, right? Because what's normal to one person may not be normal to somebody else. I'll tell you that within the framework of stress, I have a saying, right, that I trademark. It's called stress left unaddressed creates a mess. Find a counselor. And I got that from my law enforcement days, man. So many officers suffer in silence that they don't go ask for help because they're ashamed of it, whatnot. But you have to ask for help. And what happens is that our stress oftentimes is an immediate byproduct of our expectations concerning things that we cannot control. So if I want someone to do something and they don't do it, I become stressed. And that stress can become a distraction for one's life, so much so that I can assume that I have control over other people, my kids, my spouse, my coworkers, or my role at work, when really I don't have that much control, but I can believe I do. And then if I subscribe to this belief as if it's a truth, then it can cause some dysfunction in my life where things are not working out the way that they should. So if your blood pressure is going up, if you start to have strokes or sharp heart pains or palpitations and things like that, those are clear indications that, you know what, your stress level is becoming unmanageable, potentially because of these expectations connected to things you cannot control, and it's time to come see a therapist.
Dr. Puranda, I love how easy you are making this to understand. You know, you're talking in terms that just make absolute sense because we all can relate to what this feels like when stress becomes overwhelming. Are there events or situations that are most likely in people's lives to maybe trigger their anxiety, or is it different for every person?
Yeah, it can be different. And I would say it always depends, right? It depends upon the context, depends upon the situation. But you're spot on when you use the word trigger. Now, a trigger is nothing more than a psychological imprint that is created by a past experience. In our past, in every experience that we have, all of our senses are present. What we see, what we smell, taste, touch, hear. The brain itself, many people don't realize this, but the brain itself has never seen the light of day. It's been trapped inside of your skull, and it only takes in information from your senses. And so every time we go through a incident, be it traumatic or even a joyous one, the brain records everything that's being sent to it, and then it sends something to the body. It says, hey, it sends a message to the body. Hey, how should we feel about this? Oh, we feel good. Oh, this doesn't feel right. And so when we come in contact with a later experience in life, that all it requires is one sense to be triggered. So if we hear something that reminds us of that traumatic event, we automatically check in with the body. Hey, how should we feel about this sound? Oh, that's scary because it's connected to that last event that we recorded. Okay, then we get afraid. Then we start to become afraid. And that's the trigger. Now, many people, PTSD, it's a common diagnosis where we see this happen often. Intrusive thoughts, a triggering smell, a triggering sound, a triggering taste, and automatically that person goes back into the fight, flight, freeze as if the incident is now alive and well, when really it's just our conditioning to living our past in the present, which doesn't allow us to free ourselves or break free from the imprisonment of that psychological anxiety we've rooted ourselves in for the sake of safety. Many people believe that if they protect themselves by preparing for the worst case scenario, it lessens the blow or the sting of said worst case scenario if it occurs. And guess what? It never occurs. And so they run themselves through this gauntlet of terrible imagining experiences that don't exist, and then it drives up their blood pressure, and they create all kinds of complications to their internal systems, their nervous system, their digestive tract, because they're inducing their survival mode without even realizing it.
I can relate to that to that feeling.
Common.
When I was talking with other friends about the fact that I was going to be talking with you all today and be able to ask questions, I think so many people experience what they believe is anxiety, what they think is more than normal stress. And a lot of people wonder if anxiety actually manifests in ways other than just feeling anxious or nervous. And if that's possible, if that's a thing, what are some examples of what other people might, or what people might be feeling that it's actually anxiety?
Right. It goes back to something I said a little earlier about the idea of fight, flight, freeze, fawning, right? It can look like a variety of things depending upon the individual and how they grew up. And it's rooted in the attachments we have with our parents. Usually our first introduction to anxiety or stress comes from the relationships that we had with our primary caretakers. They were either available to us in the ways that we needed them, or they were not available to us. And availability is so multifaceted. They could have been absent physically and not there for a variety of reasons, or they could have been there but not available, where they just weren't emotionally available. They didn't spend time with us, whatever it might be. And all these things evolve into some form of anxiety that we cope with via fighting, taking flight, or freezing, or playing fawn. And now these survival mode responses look different in different contexts. It might be yelling, it might be arguing from a fight standpoint. Taking flight might be escaping hard conversations, or escaping the events that look triggering by avoiding people, avoiding places. Freezing, shutting down, not communicating, no longer wanting to communicate, isolating yourself from people because you believe people will carry the hurt that you're attempting to protect yourself from. Or fawning is the notion where you're trying to people please or appease someone so that they'll like you. And for the sake of avoiding the rejection or the abandonment that may have traumatized you by a primary caretaker or someone that mattered to you in your past, you will people please to make yourself valuable to this individual so that they won't reject you.
Dr. Puranda, you are hitting me right in my soul.
Am I catching you?
Okay. I am feeling everything that you are saying, and I know that so many people who are watching are too. So thank you. And I have another question about anxiety and stress, and how, for the parents who are watching, or for, in your case, you help young people, does anxiety present differently in adults and in children, or can you see similarities?
Oh, well, I'll tell you what, adults, once upon a time, some of the kids don't believe it, we were once children. And, if you were born in the 1900s, you were born when Jesus was born. If you were born in the 1900s these days, these kids. But the presentation of anxiety, it does look different. But here's the thing. It all really depends. There are two concepts I want to introduce you to: the idea of a dysfunctional family, and also potentially genetics. Like if you have a parent that is just wired to be anxious, because that can be an addiction, to be addicted to anxiety, genetically, that can be transmitted to the child, and then they just come out predisposed to being anxious. Then you have the epigenetic aspect, where the environment influences the anxiety, where if you're in a dysfunctional family and there's a narcissistic parent or a toxic parent in some capacity, or an addicted parent, that environment, you're walking on eggshells potentially, and then that can trigger anxiety. If you have a parent that's a harsh critic, nothing you do is ever good enough, nothing you ever do is right, that also induces anxiety. Again, remember, social, emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual. Even in church, right? If you don't behave godly or according to the scriptures or according to whatever the belief is, people will chastise you or penalize you as not being that. And then there's this shame base that takes over, and then there's anxiety there too. So it just looks so different across all platforms, all arenas that we all play in, that anxiety is going to manifest in different ways. But I will tell you this. It is an interrupter. It is a distractor from you making progress in the ways that you desire to make progress. And if you realize that you're not becoming who you want to be because you're concerned about what's happening in the environment from a social, emotional, physical standpoint, there are threats, then there you have anxiety, and it's going to show up in a multitude of ways. Either kids are going to be acting up in school, adults are not going to be connectable, they're going to have relationships that they don't do well in. There's going to be some form of toxicity or conflict everywhere you go. That's what anxiety does. For the sake of protecting oneself, I put my guard up, and I'm not available for anybody else in the ways that they need me.
Now, you just touched on it at the beginning of that answer, but I want to make sure that I'm clear on it. Anxiety can be inherited. It can be inherited from family members who also experience anxiety.
Yes, absolutely. Children tend to listen to what you do versus listening to what you say. And a lot of times, if you're modeling, you might tell them, don't you be anxious, but then you're modeling anxiety whenever something goes wrong, you better believe they're going to mimic what you do. Because again, we learn better through these than we do this.
Now, you said at the beginning of this the question and answer session, and we've talked about this, that you deal with a lot of young people, ages 12 to 17. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question. What kind of impact have you seen from social media use? Does it contribute to anxiety?
Oh my gosh, you would like you wouldn't imagine. I would like to say that social media contributes to the notion of comparison traps.
Mm.
There's a saying: comparison is the thief of joy.
Mm.
And when people don't feel that they are adequate enough based upon what's the perfection of the angles and the cropping and the editing of a social media post on Instagram or TikTok or whatever these platforms are, it starts to create now this idea that I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough. And this is why people are doing some outlandish stuff, some crazy stuff for the sake of clicks, because someone is paying them attention. At least I'm getting attention from someone off of social media, because in my living room, everyone is telling me to get out the way because they're watching TV. No one wants to pay me any attention. So you know what? I'm going to go to social media and do something crazy and get likes and then get, millions of followers. And then if they're smart enough, the individual will learn how to monetize that. And this is why you got people now wanting to be social influencers versus go to school the traditional way and get an education and go do X, Y, and Z. And not saying that everybody that takes that track is automatically guaranteed success, but it just goes to show that people are trying to find ways to have their needs met that they've been grieving without even realizing it.
Mm. Dr. Puranda, you are just a remarkable human. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me. I know it's going to mean so much to so many people, but you have just touched my heart. I know you've touched a lot of hearts with your words, and I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Now I want to bring back into the conversation. I introduced him at the beginning of this segment, Justin Perry. He is of Perry Counseling and Healing and Recovery. He works with the Theater Gap Initiative. Now, Mr. Perry, you have actually, thank you, first of all, for joining me. I appreciate you so much being part of this.
Absolutely. I'm glad we're doing this and appreciate the opportunity.
Now, you've listened to my conversation with Dr. Puranda. We've been talking about anxiety in children and young adults, and I know that you do some great work in collaboration with the Theater Gap Initiative on providing some alternative ways for healing for young adults. And we're talking a lot about young adults today. So tell me about the Theater Gap Initiative and about your collaboration.
Absolutely. So first of all, the Theater Gap Initiative is a nonprofit here locally in Charlotte. It is a college prep program that prepares recent high school graduates who aspire to apply for the BFA or Bachelor of Fine Arts and conservatory program. So again, doing the arts later on in college. And their program has a particular focus on students in the global majority and helping them to successfully navigate the process of screenings, auditions, and scholarships. And so, again, it's a tremendous program here in Charlotte, and it's headed by Corey Mitchell, who for a long time was a theater and drama teacher at Northwest School of the Arts. And so what I do as somebody who is trained in the space of mental health, addiction, and trauma recovery is take the skills that the kids already bring and then take the skills that I bring as somebody in the place of helping navigate stress management, navigate mental health challenges, things like that, and help them take their talents and take them to the next level while also navigating the challenges that many of them may be carrying underneath, like kids and adolescents all throughout society do. And so we do kind of monthly sessions where we do some conventional practices in the mental health space, but we also do things such as art therapy with some of my clinicians, and we do other kinds of breathing techniques and other ways of helping them figure out how to manage their stress level as they navigate this transition in life.
Now, I grew up as a theater gal, and even in college, it kind of helped me find my way and find my people. And um, in reality, now that I'm thinking about it, probably helped me deal with a great deal of anxiety through my young life. So, talk to me just and to other parents who are out there about how the arts can help children with anxiety and why parents or guardians who are out there should consider involving young people in programs like this when they're dealing with anxiety, because parents or guardians might be thinking this is exactly the opposite of what they need, because they would think being in front of people might make them more anxious. But there are so many things about the process that can help, right?
Absolutely. No, and I think you're dead on, Beth, in that it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because one of the greatest phobias people have is public speaking. So you would think, well, oh, anxiety. The last thing I want to do is put them in a situation where they're on stage in front of hundreds, maybe thousands of people. And yet, one of the things we often know about managing anxiety is that doing the exact opposite of what your instincts are is often what's best in terms of dealing with it. Because when we're facing it ourselves, lots of times what I think is I need to retreat. So I need to be alone. I need to isolate, and I can protect myself by just being alone. But when I'm alone with my thoughts and I'm dealing with anxiety, it's kind of like being a boxer who goes to the corner and puts their hands down. And now all of a sudden the anxiety is like the other boxer that just pounds on you in the corner, right?
Yeah.
And so what we often learn with anxiety is I always think about it kind of like if you're dealing with a very small yappy dog, right? And, like, yeah, right. So love them, right. But, like the reality is lots of times they will bark and yap, and everything else like that. And the more and more you retreat and the more that angst grows, the more emboldened they become, and their bark gets bigger and they become more, they gravitate to you even more. Whereas if you kind of firmly step to them in a way, they may kind of scatter a little bit. And anxiety is kind of the same thing. When you can kind of confront it and you can learn how to kind of face that angst, all of a sudden you learn how to manage it versus it managing you. And so what I see is a lot of our kids are able to kind of channel not only angst, but maybe challenges, maybe pain into something beautiful, which is a performance, which is singing, which is giving a monologue, which is dancing. And so in a way, even without talking, right? Even without talking, you were finding a way to grab a hold of something that once felt like it had a hold of you.
Oh, I love this so much. I can't even tell you. If parents are watching right now and they are recognizing that maybe the young person in their lives is dealing with some anxiety, how can parents or guardians support their children, the young people in their lives who are dealing with anxiety?
Great question. So the first thing I would say for any parent who is trying to support a child dealing with anxiety is the first thing I always start with is validating the feelings, right? Lots of times we kind of focus on changing behaviors, but I always say before you worry about changing the behavior, the first thing I want to do is validate the feelings. And part of how we do that also is just normalize it, right? Like the reality is, as a parent, it is pretty hard. I'll say as a father of two, it is hard to go through parenting without feeling the angst yourself, even if it's just simply the angst of the birthing process itself, right? And so what we do is first, we also kind of normalize to our kids. Sometimes I deal with some anxiety myself, ask them open-ended questions, ask them kind of how they're experiencing it, what's on their mind, whatever it is that they want to kind of share. And start with just kind of, again, that validation process of just saying something simple as, God, that sounds tough. I know for me, there's times where, I almost don't really want to get up and go to work either, right? And sometimes I have to figure out ways to kind of push myself through it. And sometimes I take the shower just to get myself going and things like that. And so sometimes when we start normalizing it, all of a sudden, it's no longer this big taboo stigmatized thing. It's just a reality of life. And so what I would say is start that process. And if you feel comfortable enough yourself, offer some of your own experience just with, again, normal stressors that you've managed yourself.
Mr. Perry, Dr. Puranda, you both have provided such wonderful information, such lovely insight. Thank you both so much. I want to, before we close out this session, I'd love for each of you, if you can, if you don't mind, offering just a little nugget, a little piece of advice for coping skills when anyone who's watching this, whether it be a young person, whether it be adult, coping skills for facing anxiety, whether it's a parent, a friend, a relative, an individual. How can people get in touch with organizations for assistance? Offer us a little bit of advice. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Puranda.
Sure thing. One of the critical pieces is understand. I'm really big on quotes, right? A lot of times, a lot of people have a very negative self-talk, and that talk is a conversation. And sometimes that conversation can be countered with healthy or positive affirmations or quotes. Albert Einstein has a really great quote. He said something to the effect that you cannot solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. And if we're going to look at anxiety as a mindset, right, or something that begins in the mind, if we practice thinking above the way we feel, then we can interrupt the cycle of living our past in the present, which will eventually allow us to achieve success on purpose. Because if we're living our past in the present, we're not working on our future. And so that's what I would say. It really begins with how we look at ourselves in the mirror. And Michael Jackson beat us to it. He said, everything begins with the man in the mirror. It's a great song, but it's a true statement. How we choose to look at ourselves will dictate how we manage ourselves moving forward. Again, we don't have to repeat our past in the future. And so people can follow us on Instagram. We're at ASOP of NC, or check out our website at www.asopnc.org. And that's how they can get in touch with our organization. And we're accepting referrals. If you have a child between the ages of 12 and 17 that could utilize our services, our free therapy for not only the child, but also the family, we're available.
What about you, Mr. Perry? Thank you so much, Dr. Puranda.
Awesome. This has been a great conversation. One of the things that I often use with folks is the serenity prayer, right? And I always tell people that it is more of a philosophy than it is a religious practice, right? Regardless of what your faith background is, whether there isn't a faith background, we can all apply the serenity prayer. And again, just breaking down the words of grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. One of the things I often say is that a lot of us do the serenity prayer in reverse, which is we focus on the things we can't change. Now we have no energy to change the things we actually could, and we're left feeling completely unaccomplished, right? I call that the insanity prayer. And so what I challenge anybody to do, whether it's kids and adolescents, whether it's adults, is to identify what it is you're stressed about. And then we break things down into 4 simple questions. The first question is, what is it that I'm worried about? The second question is, what can I do about it? And I literally list off what are the things I specifically can do to address this challenge. The third question I ask myself is, have I done these things? If I haven't done all of them, then I know what I need to do next. But once I have done all of those things, I go to question number 4, which is, what can I do to move on? And what can I do to move on now means, what is it that brings me joy, brings me relaxation, brings me fun, that I now get to reward myself with because I actually tackled all the things I could do to address that tough thing. And so I think if we can break down our stressors into those little small buckets, it helps us figure out how to manage it. And so that's what I am about it. I don't believe in the illusion of control, but I do believe in the power of management, right? And so that's what we want to do, is learn how to manage our stress versus it managing us. And as far as contact, you can look us up. JustinPerryCounseling.com is the website. You can find us on Instagram as well, at Justin Perry Counseling. We have a team of clinicians that do talk therapy, movement work, art therapy, a range of different modalities, working with folks as young as 12. Our oldest client right now, I think, is in their 80s. And so what we know about mental health and addiction recovery is that they don't discriminate by age. So why should the support and recovery discriminate by age? Thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you both so much for your time. This has just been incredible. And I'm sad. I'm sad now that we have come to the end of this. This has been such a great conversation. I want to thank you both for being here. The organizations that each one of you spoke about today, I think, are just incredible resources for folks. The Achieving Success on Purpose organization, I love it, with Dr. Puranda, founder, and Mr. Justin Perry, MSW of Perry Counseling, Healing, and Recovery. I want to make sure I say that right, in collaboration with the Theater Gap Initiative, both incredible organizations helping people in such beautiful ways. I genuinely hope that all of you out there watching today take full advantage of the resources you've heard about today and all of the information that these incredible gentlemen have shared. And if you know someone that could benefit from the services provided by Achieving Success on Purpose or Perry Counseling, Healing, and Recovery, or if you want more information on the Theater Gap Initiative, please see their contact information. It's on the bottom of the screen. You heard them speak about it. And in closing today, a special thank you to the Mecklenburg County ABC Board for making all of this possible by providing the community with the means and the resources for organizations such as the ones we've talked about, Achieving Success on Purpose and the Theater Gap Initiative. We're so grateful to them for all that they're doing, and we're so grateful to you, gentlemen, for joining us. Again, everyone, I'm Beth Troutman, host of Good Morning BT. I thank you so much for spending time with us today, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.